We start with that major winter storm clawing its way across the country. It could get even stronger as it targets the Northeast. The third winter storm in a week has dumped several inches of snow across parts of the Midwest. Parts of Missouri are digging out from roughly 10 inches of snow that fell near St. Louis overnight. The icy roads are proving too much for some drivers trying to navigate those slippery roadways, and crews are struggling to stay ahead of the storm, salting those roads and keeping them passable. The storm's also snarling travel plans for people who are still making their way home from Thanksgiving. Air travelers are stranded in airports yesterday, with more than 9,000 flights delayed and some nearly 600 canceled. Some schools already canceling class for the day. Now, people along the East Coast are getting ready. Forecasters warn this system could develop into a bomb cyclone, bringing snow and gusty winds to the northernmost parts of the I-95 corridor. That would add to the snow that already fell over the weekend. It may only be early December, but folks are already bracing for what could be a long winter.
If we're starting now, I think we're going to get quite a bit of snow.
Trick is just layer up and hopefully get through it.
News meteorologist Angie Lassman will have your forecast in a moment. First, NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin has made her way to Scranton, Pennsylvania with the latest. Erin, good morning.
Hey there, good morning. We are bracing for the first snow of the season here in Scranton, Pennsylvania, with 3 to 6 inches in the forecast, set to strike at any moment. Part of that fast-moving storm that slammed the Midwest overnight with heavy snow sweeping across the Great Lakes. It's a storm system impacting more than 80 million Americans, and the conditions are treacherous out there. The roads slick with snow, causing collisions and gridlock on some highways in the Midwest, with snow crews also scrambling. Pennsylvania state officials told me they've been working tirelessly to prepare the roads for this very moment. And in New Jersey, the governor just declared a state of emergency for the northwestern part of the state, posting on X, starting early tomorrow morning, we anticipate snowfall, sleet, and freezing rain. I urge all drivers to exercise caution, remain alert, and follow all safety protocols. In Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York, some school districts have canceled classes and others have delayed openings. While in the skies, the fresh snow continues to pose a threat to travel plans for all those still making it home for the holiday. All this at the tail end of a record-breaking holiday travel, with TSA screening 3.1 million people on Sunday, the most ever. And I can say to you, it's pretty cold out here, and these chilly conditions are set to stay. NOAA predicting a colder than average month of December for the northern part of the country. So make sure you bundle up for the rest of the month.
Some good advice. Thank you, Erin. For more on this winter storm, which has millions under weather alerts, let's bring in Angie Lassman. She's got your forecast. Angie, good morning.
Hi, Joe. Good morning to you. As Erin mentioned, boy, do we have a lot of impacts from this system as it's working its way east. Now, one thing to note, it is going to continue to move out of the Ohio Valley. So you'll see folks in those regions, the Great Lakes, start to see things wind down and have some improvements. But it's the Mid-Atlantic up through the Northeast that we're going to really start to ramp things up if we haven't already. Washington, D.C. to Raleigh and out towards Knoxville. It's rain for you right now. We've got that snow across the interior areas of the Northeast, stretching from Cleveland to Syracuse. Boston, New York City, not quite getting in on the action just yet, but we've still got time. And 57 million people, of course, are under these winter weather alerts at this point. Now, as we get through the day today, let's go kind of hour by hour to see exactly where we stand. We've got the cold soaking rain stretching from the Carolinas all the way down to New York City, and that's going to leave us, of course, with a difficulty when it comes to travel. And then we've also got those periods of heavy snow stretched across the interior area of the Northeast. The I-95 corridor, that's where we're going to see kind of maybe a wintry mix that transitions over basically into rain. And then as we get into 3 p.m., this is a look at your afternoon. That heaviest snow across parts of New York and New England, basically northern New York to New England, and then that steady rain and really honestly the gusty winds along the coast. That's where we're going to see kind of wind-swept rain for folks in that region. And then as we get closer to the evening, a lot of these locations are going to start to clear out early evening, late evening, New York City, Philadelphia, even Hartford. But we'll still see some rain and snow kind of lingering across parts of northern New England. And then all of that will kind of come to an end here as we get past midnight. Now, between now and then, of course, there's those 3 impacts. So let's start with the heavy snow. We've got those highest totals stretched across the Catskills to Maine. We could see up to a foot in some locations. Closer to the coast, of course, it's going to be mostly rain, but heads up for anyone in the interior Northeast and across parts of this region where you're going to see likely some difficulty when it comes to road travel. So the driving on those icy roads across folks in places like Harrisonburg, Winchester, Charlottesville, all going to see the potential for some accumulating ice with that freezing rain. And then the rainfall amounts, the heaviest totals are going to be closer to the coast, but keep in mind that you will see likely maybe some ponding on the roadways as we get through the day today. So, of course, guys, that's going to cause some problems when it comes to travel. We know that it was a headache over the weekend, and if the folks are still trying to get out, we're likely going to see delays from Charlotte all the way to Boston today.
All right, get that headache medication ready.
Yeah,
Angie,
exactly.
Thank you so much. The Trump administration is facing mounting questions over whether a U.S. strike on an alleged drug smuggling boat in the Caribbean was carried out within the law. The White House confirmed yesterday the U.S. did launch a follow-up strike on September 2nd, and that strike killed the remaining survivors of an earlier bombing of a vessel that officials said was from Venezuela. Some lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, plus some legal experts, say that second attack on people who would likely be otherwise incapacitated could constitute a war crime. Yesterday, the White House press secretary responded to a Washington Post report that really ignited so much of this blowback. That story cited two people with direct knowledge of the event and tied the second strike to a verbal order allegedly given by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to, quote, kill everybody. Well, Caroline Leavitt instead shifted the focus to a Navy admiral who was leading the Joint Special Operations Command at the time.
On September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
To clarify, Admiral Bradley was the one who gave that order for a second strike.
And he was well within his authority to do so.
U.S. Special Operations Command, which Admiral Bradley now leads, did not immediately respond to NBC's request for comment. Some lawmakers are now calling on Admiral Bradley and Secretary Hegseth to testify before Congress. NBC News intelligence reporter Dan DeLuce joins us with more on this. Dan, good morning. So President Trump met with his national security team in the Oval Office yesterday. How is the administration's strategy on this evolving as they face these growing legal questions and honestly more reporting from the media? And also, what do we know about Admiral Bradley?
Yeah, Joe, I think this has become a difficult question for the administration. You heard the press secretary there reading from a statement that seemed pretty carefully worded, and they acknowledged there was this second strike, but they're insisting that this was legal. But there's still so many questions and so many details not being offered up here yet. And yes, as far as Admiral Bradley's concerned, they do seem to be putting the responsibility for the second strike on Admiral Bradley. He's a distinguished officer in the Navy. He was a Navy SEAL, served in combat, was among some of the first troops to deploy to Afghanistan after the September 11th attacks. And it's not clear exactly what the interaction was between him and the defense secretary. And I think that's what a lot of lawmakers want to know.
So let's talk about lawmakers. We know members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees are moving forward with their probe for answers. Sounds like we could get some more clarity in the coming days. This has really become a bipartisan effort here. So what kind of evidence are they trying to gather? And what would this process take place out in the open at a congressional hearing?
Joe, I think most likely this is going to be behind closed doors because this is about military operations, and they don't want to speak about those publicly, I don't think. It is very significant that the Republican chairs of the Armed Services Committee in both committees, both in the Senate and the House, have spoken out publicly expressing their concern and asked for hearings. That has been pretty unusual during the Trump presidency, where there's kind of a maximum amount of loyalty on the Hill. So I think it shows you how much there is this concern among lawmakers that maybe these strikes, that second strike, violated the laws of war. And of course, these are laws and rules that are inculcated in all the military and throughout the United States and our democratic allies in NATO, which is that you don't, for example, fire on civilians and you don't fire on wounded troops who are no longer enemy troops that are no longer present an imminent threat. So a lot of questions here. I don't think some of the evidence will come out in public that will be the most difficult part of this.
Dan, before we let you go, I do want to ask you about the ex-president of Honduras. So let's give folks a little background here. President Trump pardoned Juan Orlando Hernandez over the weekend. He was serving a 45-year prison sentence here in the U.S. after he was convicted on drug trafficking and weapons charges. That was just a year ago. That was during the Biden administration. He was convicted of being part of a scheme that brought 500 tons of cocaine into this country over decades. So how is the president now defending this pardon? I mean, critics like Virginia Senator Tim Kaine argue this undercuts this current anti-drug trafficking operation aimed at Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro. What's going on here?
Joe, it does seem to be a massive contradiction. Also, former federal prosecutors expressed outrage and shock about this decision. The president seems to be suggesting that this former president of Honduras was the victim of a conspiracy, that he was merely pursued by his political opponents and framed somehow. But that doesn't explain where all that evidence came from in federal court. That was enough for a court to convict him. But he seems to be indicating that this man is innocent, didn't deserve to be prosecuted. And the president is very interested in that election. And he's trying to help one party that is the party of that former president. So he wants to see the election outcome in what he believes is the U.S.'s favor. So that pardon, it seems to be tied up with that whole approach.
All right, Dan, a lot to cover here. Thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. One of the sons of Mexican drug kingpin El Chapo is taking a plea deal in a major U.S. drug trafficking case. In a federal court in Chicago yesterday, Joaquin Guzman Lopez pleaded guilty to 2 counts of drug trafficking and continuing a criminal enterprise. He admitted to overseeing the transport of tens of thousands of kilos of drugs into the U.S. through underground tunnels. Comes months after his brother also entered into a plea deal. The pair is accused of running a faction of the Sinaloa cartel once led by their father. Federal officials have accused the cartel of conspiring to send a staggering amount of fentanyl into the U.S. Lopez avoided a life sentence by taking the deal, but he does still face at least 10 years in prison. Accused killer Luigi Mangione will be back in a New York City courtroom this morning for more of those pivotal pretrial hearings. This is a legal fight over what evidence the jury will eventually see. The 27-year-old appeared in court yesterday for day 1 of what's expected to be a week's worth of hearings. Mangione's defense team is arguing that several key pieces of evidence should not be admissible in his state murder trial because of how they were seized. He's accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson last year in Midtown Manhattan. NBC News senior national correspondent Stephanie Gosk was in the courtroom when the 911 call that led to his arrest was played for the first time.
New details about accused killer Luigi Mangione's arrest in a Pennsylvania McDonald's nearly a year ago. The Ivy League grad arriving in New York State court with permission to wear civilian clothes. During the pretrial hearing, they played the 911 call placed by the McDonald's manager publicly for the first time. Customers thought he looked suspicious, the manager told the operator, adding, "He looks like the CEO shooter in New York, and they are really upset." At one point, she says, "I don't know what to do here, guys." Mangione pleaded not guilty to state and federal murder charges. His defense team is in court this week hoping to get critical pieces of evidence thrown out before going to trial, including everything discovered in his backpack in that McDonald's, a gun, bullets, and Mangione's alleged writings. Prosecutors say he wrote someone should whack the CEO. Mangione's defense argues the backpack was illegally searched inside the McDonald's without a warrant, and there was a delay in reading his Miranda rights. Prosecutors say the search was justified, in part because police were concerned for their safety.
How difficult is it to have evidence actually thrown out before trial?
It's an uphill battle for defendants. And the reason is, even though a warrantless search is generally unconstitutional, there are so many exceptions.
Also taking the stand, Pennsylvania prison guard who says he had long conversations with Mangione while the accused murderer was under constant watch after being arrested. According to the guard, they discussed how Brian Thompson's murder was being reported. Also part of the conversation, healthcare coverage, specifically the differences between private and universal care.
Stephanie Gosk, NBC News.
All right, you just saw her there in Stephanie's piece. Now I'm here with NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris to dive into this a little further, revealing day one in court from the prosecutor showing new surveillance footage, the 911 calls. What stood out to you the most?
I actually think this 911 call, something new. We didn't really know what the circumstances were on that day. It's a McDonald's employee who calls and says there are customers here who are really upset because they think the United Healthcare CEO killer is at the McDonald's. Calls 911, police respond. This is important because part of what prosecutors are trying to show is what's called exigent circumstances, meaning there was an emergency situation, and this call was setting the stage for how everything else unfolded on that day. Really important to the prosecution's argument.
All right, you told Steph there that even when you don't have this level of attention, this would be an uphill battle for defendants to get this evidence thrown out. Let's recap there. Mangione's legal team essentially arguing because there was no search warrant, he wasn't read his Miranda rights, everything basically seized at McDonald's, backpack, journal, gun, it should all be suppressed. Just looking at history, remove this case and what we've seen in this case so far, how successful is this type of argument usually?
Well, it's really fact-based, and all of the law that we're talking about, the legal standards that are going to be decided by the judge, whether or not the search and the statements come into the courtroom, that is based on case law. So these are cases that have gone up on appeal and decisions have been made about whether or not warrantless searches are justified. And the reason why it's so challenging from a defense perspective is that, of course, there's the default rule. A warrantless search is unconstitutional. But there are many, many exceptions to those rules. And oftentimes you're going to see evidence fitting into those. And I think that's what's going to happen here.
So we heard from 5 witnesses yesterday. That includes a prison guard who spoke at length with Mangione. Prosecutors expected to call a number of others to take the stand throughout the week. What are the stories that both the prosecution and the defense are trying to tell this week to try and get their side to win?
So the prosecution, and remember who the audience is, right? It's Judge Caro. He's been on the bench for 25 years. He's probably done thousands of these. He knows the legal standards. Prosecution wants to focus on what was happening at the time. They're talking about this manhunt of somebody. There's a video in the public sphere. Everybody's looking for this person who's on the run. They want to set that stage and then have all the officers come on the stand and justify why they did what and when. Defense, on the other hand, really focused on the timeline, minute to minute. Where was Luigi? Where was the backpack? Who's talking to him at what point? And that minutia, and trying to fit into that overall argument that all of this evidence should be thrown out.
All right, more to come today. Misty, good to have you with us. Thank you so much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.